The office was a glass cage, reflecting New York's restless skyline as the sun bled into the horizon. I stood by the window, my heart pounding louder than the city's hum, watching Julian's silhouette against the glow. For years as his assistant, and every day, I buried the truth. I was in love with him, and he loved me back. It started innocently enough. A glance held too long, a laugh that lingered. I was 24, fresh out of college, when I landed the job as Julian Carter's executive assistant at Carter & Pierce, a cutthroat PR firm in Manhattan. Julian was 31 then, a rising star with a jawline that could carve glass and a reputation for being untouchable. He was the kind of man who commanded boardrooms, his voice low and deliberate, his suits tailored to perfection. I was just Ethan Reed, a small-town kid from Ohio, wide-eyed and unprepared for the storm that was Julian. My first day, he barely looked at me. Files on my desk by 9. Coffee black. No sugar, he said, not glancing up from his laptop. I nodded, scribbling notes, my hands trembling. But by week 2, I noticed the way his eyes softened when I handed him his coffee. The way he'd ask, "You holding up, Ethan?" with a warmth that felt personal. By month 3, we were staying late, just the two of us, sorting through client pitches under the hum of fluorescent lights. He'd roll up his sleeves, revealing forearms that made my breath catch. And we'd talk about music, dreams, the weight of expectations. I learned he grew up in Boston, raised by a single mom who worked 3 jobs. He learned I was the first in my family to go to college, carrying their hopes like a backpack full of bricks. One night, after a brutal 14-hour day, he offered me a ride home. The rain was relentless, drumming on the roof of his sleek black Audi. "You don't have to do this," I said, but he just smiled. That rare, unguarded smile that made my chest ache. We didn't go to my apartment. Instead, we ended up at a diner in Brooklyn, sharing greasy fries and stories until 2 a.m. When he dropped me off, his hand brushed mine on the gear shift. It was electric, a spark that burned through my defenses. "Good night, Ethan," he said, his voice low, and I knew then I was in trouble. We never spoke about it, but the air between us shifted. Stolen glances became stolen touches, his fingers grazing mine when passing a file, my shoulder brushing his in a crowded elevator. By the end of my first year, we were meeting in secret, kissing in his office after hours. The city lights our only witnesses. Julian was married to his career, he said, and I was his secret, a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. He was closeted, terrified of losing everything he'd built. I was openly gay but swore to keep us hidden, not for shame, but for him. I loved him enough to live in the shadows. The office was our stage, and we were flawless actors. I was the diligent assistant, organizing his schedule, fielding calls, keeping his world in order. He was the untouchable CEO, charming clients, closing deals. No one suspected a thing, not his business partner, not the interns, not even Sarah, the HR manager who watched everyone like a hawk. But every night, when the office emptied, we'd lock the door, and he'd pull me close, his lips tasting of coffee and regret. "I don't deserve you," he'd whisper, and I'd silence him with a kiss, pretending I could outrun the ache of being his secret. For years in, the weight of it was crushing me. I was 28 now, No longer the naive kid who thought love could conquer all. Julian was 35, his hair flecked with silver, his eyes carrying a weariness I couldn't fix. We were still in love. But love wasn't enough when every moment was stolen. Every touch a risk. I wanted more real life together. Not just late-night confessions. But Julian was trapped. Bound by fear of a world that might tear him apart if it knew who he really was. That evening, as I stood by the window, he approached, his reflection merging with mine in the glass. "Ethan," he said softly, his hand hovering near mine. I turned, my heart a tangled mess of hope and dread. "We need to talk," he said, and I knew, in that moment, our world was about to change. The words hung between us like smoke, thick and suffocating. Julian's office, once our sanctuary, felt like a courtroom now, his desk a barrier between us. I braced myself, my hands gripping the edge of a chair, as he paced, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice cracking like thin ice. "Not to you. Not to us." My stomach dropped. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, him ending it, choosing his career, his image, over me. But his eyes, those sharp blue eyes that could unravel me with a glance, were pleading, not cold. "I'm tired of hiding. Ethan. I'm tired of pretending you're just my assistant." I wanted to believe him, but 4 years of secrecy had taught me caution. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stopped pacing, leaning against the desk, his hands clenched. "I'm saying I want to be with you. For real. But it's not that simple." It never was. Julian's life was a house of cards, his firm, his reputation, his carefully crafted persona. Coming out wouldn't just be a personal choice. It would be a detonation. Carter and Pierce thrived on conservative clients, old money types who whispered about values over whiskey. Julian had clawed his way to the top, and being openly gay could cost him everything. I knew this. I'd always known. But hearing him say he wanted more, after years of silence, lit a spark of hope I couldn't extinguish. "Then what do we do?" I asked, stepping closer, close enough to smell his cologne, the same cedarwood scent that clung to my sheets after he'd spent the night. He reached for my hand, his touch tentative, like he was afraid I'd pull away. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't lose you." That night, we didn't go to my apartment or his. Instead, we walked the city, our shoulders brushing, blending into the anonymity of New York's crowds. We ended up at a quiet bar in the West Village, a place where no one knew us. Over cheap whiskey, Julian told me things he'd never shared, how he'd known he was gay since high school, but buried it under ambition. How his mother's sacrifices fueled his drive. How meeting me was the first time he felt alive. I told him about my own fears, being the small-town kid who never fit in, finding freedom in New York, only to trade it for a different kind of closet. We made a plan, fragile but real. Julian would start small, testing the waters with his business partner, David, a gruff man who valued results over gossip. I'd keep playing my role, the perfect assistant, until we knew it was safe. But plans are only as strong as the people who make them. And the next morning, reality hit hard. David called an emergency meeting. A major client, a Midwest retail chain, was threatening to pull their account. Rumors were swirling someone had seen Julian and me at the bar. Too close. Too comfortable. It's nothing, Julian told David, his voice steady. But I saw the panic in his eyes. I stood in the corner, pretending to take notes, my heart hammering. Sarah from HR was there, her gaze sharp, like she could smell the truth. The meeting dragged on, but the damage was done. Whispers spread through the office like wildfire. By lunch, I overheard 2 interns speculating about Julian's personal life. I wanted to scream, to tell them they didn't know him, didn't know us. Instead, I kept my head down, answering emails, scheduling meetings, playing the role I'd perfected. But inside, I was unraveling. That night, Julian came to my apartment, something he rarely did. He looked wrecked, his tie undone, his hair a mess. "They're watching us," he said, collapsing onto my couch. David asked me point blank if there's something going on. I froze, my hands shaking as I poured us wine. "What did you say?" I asked. He looked at me, his eyes raw. I lied. I said, "You're just my assistant." The words stung, even though I understood. I sat beside him, our knees touching, and we sat in silence, the weight of our secret heavier than ever. "I meant what I said last night," he whispered. "I want a life with you, but I need time." I nodded, swallowing the ache in my throat. I'd given him 4 years. What was a little more? Time is a cruel thing when you're waiting for a life you can't have. Days turned into weeks, and the office became a minefield. Every glance, every word between Julian and me was scrutinized. Sarah started hovering, asking pointed questions about my workload. The intern's whispers grew louder, and even David, usually oblivious, seemed colder, his eyes narrowing when I handed Julian a file. Julian tried to keep things normal, but I could see the strain. He was sharper in meetings, his charm replaced by a clipped efficiency. At night, when we stole moments in his office, he'd hold me tighter, like I was the only thing keeping him grounded. "I'm working on it," he'd say, but the plan we'd made felt like a dream fading in daylight. One evening, I found a note on my desk, handwritten, and signed, "Be careful. People are talking." My blood ran cold. I showed it to Julian, and his face hardened. "Someone knows," he said, crumpling the paper. We started being more careful. No late nights, no lingering touches. But the distance only made the ache worse. I missed him. Not just the stolen kisses, but the way we used to talk. The way he made me feel seen. Then came the gala. Carter and Pierce hosted an annual event for clients. A glittering affair at a midtown hotel. I was there as Julian's assistant, clipboard in hand, managing logistics. He was the star, working the room in a tuxedo that made my heart skip. I watched him laugh with clients, his smile a mask I knew too well. But when our eyes met across the room, there was a flicker of something raw, something only I could see. After the speeches, I slipped out to the balcony for air. The city sparkled below, indifferent to my turmoil. Julian found me there, his bow tie loosened, his face flushed from champagne. "You look miserable," he said, standing too close. I laughed. Bitter. "I'm your assistant, not your date. That's how it works, right?" His face fell, and for a moment, I thought he'd kiss me right there. Consequences be damned. Instead, he took my hand, hidden by the shadows. I'm trying. Ethan. I swear. But trying wasn't enough. The next day, David called me into his office. You're a good assistant, he said. His tone clipped. But we can't afford distractions. If there's anything personal affecting your work, I need to know. My mouth went dry. I mumbled something about being professional, but his eyes said he didn't believe me. When I told Julian, he went quiet, his jaw tight. I'll handle it, he said, but I could see the fear in him. The same fear that kept us in the dark for 4 years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep living half a life. I loved Julian, but love was starting to feel like a wound that wouldn't heal. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't keep waiting for him to be ready. I typed up a resignation letter, my hands shaking as I saved it to my laptop. I wasn't ready to send it. Not yet. But it was there. A lifeline if I needed it. At work, things got worse. A client meeting went south, and Julian snapped at me in front of the team. Something he'd never done. Get the files right next time. Ethan, he said, his voice cold. I knew it was stress, but it hurt like hell. I stormed out, heading to the break room to cool off. That's when Sarah cornered me. You and Julian, she said, her voice low. Whatever it is, it's affecting the firm. End it, or I'll make sure David knows. I stared at her, my heart pounding. She didn't have proof, but she didn't need it. The threat was enough. I went to Julian's office, closing the door behind me. Sarah knows, I said, my voice shaking. She's going to tell David. Julian's face went pale. He stood, crossing the room in 2 strides, and pulled me into his arms. I won't let them hurt you, he said, his voice fierce. But I pulled back, tears burning my eyes. It's not about me. It's about us. I can't keep being your secret. Julian. I can't. The air in Julian's office was thick with everything we hadn't said. I stood there, my chest tight, waiting for him to speak, to fight for us. But he just looked at me, his eyes a storm of guilt and fear. I need you to trust me, he finally said, his voice low. I'm going to fix this. How? I demanded, my voice breaking. Sarah's not bluffing. If she talks, it's over your career, the firm, everything you've built. I didn't say us, but it hung there, heavy as the city outside. Julian ran a hand through his hair, pacing again. I'll talk to her. I'll make her understand. But I wasn't sure he could. Sarah wasn't just nosy. She was ambitious, gunning for a promotion. Exposing Julian would be her leverage. I wanted to believe he could charm his way out, like he always did. But this wasn't a client pitch. This was our lives. The next day, Julian called a meeting with Sarah and David. I wasn't invited, but I lingered outside, pretending to organize files, my heart in my throat. Through the glass door, I saw Julian's hands gesturing, his face calm but strained. Sarah's arms were crossed, her lips a thin line. David looked confused, then angry. When they emerged, Sarah shot me a look that could have cut glass. Julian caught my eye, giving a slight nod, but his expression told me nothing was resolved. Later, he pulled me into a stairwell, away from prying eyes. I told them it's nonsense, he said, his voice urgent. But Sarah's digging. She's got no proof, but she's relentless. I nodded, my throat tight. What did David say? Julian hesitated. He said to keep my personal life out of the office. He doesn't know, but he suspects. The rest of the week was a blur of tension. I threw myself into work, avoiding Julian's gaze, trying to act normal. But normal was gone. Every email I sent, every call I answered, felt like a lie. At night, I'd stare at my resignation letter, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. I didn't want to leave, but staying was tearing me apart. Then came the breaking point. A client dinner. One of those endless affairs with too much wine and fake smiles. Julian insisted I come, saying my presence kept him grounded. I sat at the far end of the table, watching him charm the room, his laughter masking the strain I knew too well. But halfway through, a client's wife, tipsy and loud, made a comment about Julian's assistant always hovering. The table laughed, but Sarah's eyes locked onto mine, sharp and knowing. After dinner, she cornered me in the hotel lobby. You're not fooling anyone, she hissed. I've seen the way you look at him. If you don't back off, I'll make sure everyone knows. My blood boiled. I wanted to tell her to go to hell, to scream that I loved him. But I just stood there, silent, my fists clenched. She walked away, her heels clicking like a countdown. I found Julian outside, smoking a rare cigarette, his face lit by the glow of a street lamp. She threatened me, I said, my voice shaking. He flicked the cigarette away, his jaw tight. I'll handle her, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. I grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at me. You keep saying that, but nothing changes. I'm drowning. Julian, I can't keep doing this. He pulled me into an alley, out of sight, and kissed me, hard and desperate. I love you, he said against my lips. I'm not letting you go. But when he pulled back, his eyes were haunted. Give me one more week, he said. I'll figure it out. I wanted to believe him, but doubt was a knife in my chest. That night, I went home alone, my apartment feeling emptier than ever. I opened my laptop, staring at the resignation letter. My finger hovered over the send button, but I couldn't do it. Not yet. The next morning, Julian was different focused, almost reckless. He called a meeting with the firm's top clients, announcing a new initiative to embrace authenticity in their branding. I watched, stunned, as he spoke about integrity, about living truthfully, his eyes flicking to me. Was this his way of testing the waters? Or was it just another performance? Julian's speech lit a fuse, and the office buzzed with speculation. Was he hinting at something personal? Was it just corporate jargon? I saw the way David watched him, his brow furrowed, and Sarah's smug smile as she typed furiously on her phone. I wanted to believe Julian was paving the way for us, but fear gnawed at me. What if this was another false start? That afternoon, he called me into his office. The door clicked shut, and he pulled me close, his hands framing my face. I meant every word. He said, his voice low. I'm done hiding. But I need to do this my way. My heart leapt. But caution held me back. What's your way? I asked. He kissed me softly, a promise in his touch. Trust me, he said again, and I hated how much I wanted to. The next day, Julian met with David alone. I waited in the break room, pretending to read emails, my stomach in knots. When he emerged, he looked drained but resolute. David's on board, he said later, in the stairwell. He doesn't care who I am as long as the firm stays strong. But I need to tell the board. The board 6 older men who value tradition over truth. I felt sick. Are you sure? I asked. He nodded. His jaw set. I'm doing this for us. But Sarah wasn't done. She emailed the entire staff, citing concerns about workplace professionalism. It didn't name us, but the implication was clear. By noon, the office was a hornet's nest of gossip. I overheard a colleague whisper, "Julian's too close to his assistant." My face burned, but I kept working, my hands steady on the keyboard. Julian, meanwhile, was a ghost, locked in meetings, preparing for the board. That night, he came to my apartment, his eyes wild with determination. I'm telling them tomorrow, he said, pacing my tiny living room. I'm coming out. To everyone. My heart stopped. Julian, you could lose everything. He turned, his gaze fierce. I'd rather lose the firm than lose you. I pulled him close, kissing him, my tears mixing with his. For the first time, I believed we might make it. The next morning, I arrived early, my resignation letter still unsent, a weight in my pocket. The board meeting was at 10 a.m., and I busied myself with emails, trying to ignore the dread. At 9:50, Julian texted me, "Stay close." I stood outside the conference room, my heart pounding. As he walked in, his shoulders squared. The meeting stretched on, voices muffled through the door. At one point, I heard shouting David's voice, then Julian's, calm but firm. When the door opened, Julian emerged, his face unreadable. The board members filed out, their expressions grim. David patted Julian's shoulder, but Sarah lingered, her eyes gleaming with triumph. What happened? I whispered when we were alone. Julian took a deep breath. I told them I'm gay. I told them about us. My knees buckled. And he swallowed. They're not happy. They want to vote to remove me as CEO. My world tilted. Julian. No, he cut me off, his hand on mine. It's not over. I'm fighting this. The rest of the day was chaos. Clients called, demanding answers. The staff whispered, some supportive, some hostile. Sarah was everywhere, fueling the fire. By evening, Julian was called back to the board. I waited, my resignation letter burning a hole in my mind. When he returned, he looked broken. They're voting tomorrow, he said. If I lose, I'm out. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream, to beg him to take it back, to keep us safe in the shadows. But he looked at me, his eyes steady. I'd do it again, he said. You're worth it. I kissed him, my heart breaking and healing all at once. Whatever happened tomorrow, we were in this together. The night before the vote, we didn't sleep. Julian stayed at my apartment. The city's hum a distant comfort. We lay on my couch, tangled together, talking about everything but tomorrow. He told me about his first crush, a boy in high school he'd never dared approach. I told him about coming out to my parents, their quiet acceptance a gift I hadn't expected. We laughed. We cried. And for a few hours, we were just Ethan and Julian. Not a secret. Not a scandal. Morning came too soon. At the office, the air was thick with tension. Colleagues avoided my eyes, their whispers a low hum. Julian was already in the conference room when I arrived. His suit impeccable, his face a mask of calm. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, but I stood by my desk, playing my role one last time. The board meeting dragged on for hours. I busied myself with pointless tasks, my heart racing every time the door opened. At noon, David emerged, his face grim. They're still deliberating, he told me, his voice softer than usual. He's fighting hard. I nodded, unable to speak. My resignation letter saved and ready on my laptop. If Julian lost, I was done. I couldn't stay in a place that rejected him. At 2 p.m., the door opened again, and Julian walked out. His eyes found mine, and I knew. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just held my gaze, steady and sure. The board followed, their faces a mix of exhaustion and resolve. David cleared his throat. Julian stays, he announced to the staff. But we're implementing new oversight. No more distractions. His eyes flicked to me. A warning. Relief flooded me, but it was bittersweet. Julian had kept his job, but at a cost. The board's oversight meant scrutiny, control. Sarah was promoted to compliance officer, her smirk a constant reminder of her power. That evening, Julian and I met in his office. The door locked. We did it, he said, pulling me close. But his voice was hollow. Did we? I asked, my hands on his chest. He didn't answer, just kissed me, slow and deep. The next weeks were a tightrope. Julian was under a microscope, every decision questioned. I kept my distance at work, our love confined to stolen moments outside the office. But the city felt different now, alive with possibility. We went on real dates, dinner in Brooklyn, walks in Central Park, holding hands like any other couple. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Then came the email. A headhunter, offering me a job at a rival firm. Better pay, more responsibility. I stared at the screen, my resignation letter still unsent. Julian found me at my desk, his face soft. You're thinking about it, he said. Not a question. I nodded. I love you, but I can't keep being your assistant. Not like this. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles. Then don't, he said. Be my partner. I froze. What? He smiled. That rare, unguarded smile. I'm done with half measures. Move in with me. Build a life with me. My heart soared, but doubt lingered. What about the firm? I asked. He shrugged. I'll fight for it. But you're my priority. For the first time, I believed him completely. That night, I deleted my resignation letter. We made plans not just for a home, but for a future. Julian started pushing back against the board, regaining control. Sarah's influence waned as clients rallied behind Julian's honesty. The firm didn't collapse. It thrived, proving truth was stronger than secrets. Moving in with Julian felt like stepping into a new world. His apartment, a sleek loft in Tribeca, became ours. We filled it with pieces of Usme books, his vinyl collection, a photo of us at Coney Island, laughing like kids. At work, I took the new job, leaving Carter and Pierce. It was bittersweet, saying goodbye to the place where we'd fallen in love. But it was time. I was no longer his assistant, no longer his secret. I was his partner. The firm stabilized, but the scars remained. Julian worked harder than ever, proving himself to the board, to the clients, to himself. I watched him navigate it all, his resilience a quiet strength. At night, he'd come home, shedding his CEO armor, and we'd cook dinner, talk about nothing and everything. It wasn't perfect. There were fights, fears, moments of doubt, but it was real. Sarah didn't let go easily. She leaked a story to a trade publication, hinting at instability at Carter and Pierce. It backfired. Clients, inspired by Julian's courage, doubled down, praising his authenticity. The board, sensing the tide, eased their oversight. Sarah left the firm a month later, her ambitions crumbling. I felt no satisfaction, only relief. We started building a life outside the office. Weekends in upstate New York, hiking trails, kissing under starlit skies. Julian came out to his mother, a tearful call that ended with her saying, "I just want you happy." My parents met him, awkward at first, but warmed by his charm. We weren't just a couple. We were a family, carving out a place in a world that wasn't always kind. But the past lingered. One night, over wine, Julian admitted he still feared losing it all. "I spent so long hiding," he said, his voice soft. "Sometimes I don't know how to be this open." I took his hand, my heart steady. "You're not alone anymore," I said. "We'll figure it out together." And we did. We found a rhythm, a balance between love and ambition. I thrived at my new job, no longer in Julian's shadow. He redefined Carter and Pierce, making it a beacon for inclusivity. We hosted dinners for friends, gay and straight, our home a sanctuary of laughter and acceptance. The city, once a cage, became our canvas. One evening, walking home from a movie, Julian stopped me under a street lamp. "Marry me," he said. No ring, no plan, just him, raw and real. I laughed, tears in my eyes. "You're supposed to get down on one knee." He grinned, pulling me close. "I'm done with rules. Say yes." I did, my heart full, the weight of 4 years lifting. Our engagement wasn't a fairy tale, but it was ours. We planned a small wedding, just family and close friends, in a garden upstate. The day was warm, the air thick with the scent of blooming lilacs. Julian wore a simple suit, his eyes never leaving mine as we said our vows. "I was lost until you," he said, his voice breaking. I promised to love him, shadows and all. my heart steady as I slipped a ring onto his finger. The years that followed weren't without struggle. The firm faced challenges, new competitors, shifting markets, but Julian led with courage. His authenticity is strength. I built a career I was proud of, mentoring young professionals, many of them queer, who saw in me a path they could follow. We didn't hide anymore, and that freedom was worth every fight. Looking back, those 4 years as his assistant, his secret, were both a burden and a gift. They taught me love is patient, but also fierce, demanding truth even when it hurts. Julian and I grew together, learning to navigate a world that doesn't always make space for people like us. But we made our own space, built on honesty, on love that refused to stay hidden. One night, years later, we stood on our balcony, the city glittering below. Julian wrapped his arms around me, his chin on my shoulder. "Worth it?" he asked, his voice soft. I turned, kissing him, the man I'd loved through secrets and storms. "Every second," I said. And as the city hummed around us, I knew we'd keep fighting, keep loving, keep building a life that was ours, unapologetically.